And this three-step approach creates an arc. And an arc is the key to making the presentation engaging. One of the most common mistakes that I see is overuse of technical jargon. Complete shift in mindset than what we're used to as technical professionals. And what I mean by that is this. Empathy is one of the most important skills to have as an analyst. And I think it's soft skills, quote unquote, like communication, are just as vital to your role as an analyst as the technical ones.
Welcome to the Data Talk with Doers, the podcast where we explore the exciting world of data and speak to the experts who are making an impact in the field. In today's episode, we are thrilled to have Christopher Chin, a seasoned tech professional with a wealth of experience in data. But what sets Christopher apart from others in this industry is his belief that public speaking and presentation skills are just as crucial to success as technical knowledge is. As Christopher knows firsthand, being able to effectively communicate complex ideas and data-driven insights is essential to making a real impact in the field of data. Throughout this episode, Christopher will share his insights and experience on honing your public speaking skills that can elevate your career in data. From tips on crafting compelling presentations to advising on delivering a winning pitch, Christopher will offer practical advices that listeners can apply to their own work. So let's get ready to learn from one of the incredible mind, insightful and experienced voice. Welcome to Data Talk with Doers with our guest, Christopher Chin.
Thanks so much, Nima. That was a very kind introduction.
Thank you. So let's get started with your background. Can you please tell us a bit of your background and how you started in data and how you got what made you interested in this field?
So I originally started in a very different field from data. I originally started in music composition. So I used to write music for things like short films, advertising, and that was a very creative period of my life. What I realized along the way was that I was really interested in the more technical side of things as well. So engineering is what I initially went into after music. I actually went into acoustic engineering, which is the closest engineering field I could find that resembled music. So I became an acoustic engineer for a while. And I did consulting work, creating architectural spaces based on sound principles. And over the course of that work experience, I discovered the data field. And it was through exposure to creating different kinds of algorithms for sustainability. So I was looking at different audio recordings and trying to identify if endangered whale species were present, calling within those recordings. And to do so, I needed to learn a lot about data science. I needed to learn about algorithms, how to make all of that work. And that was my first transition into the data field at large, first through data science. And over the course of upskilling in that, I discovered that my real interest wasn't really in the algorithms and models, but more in the visualization and storytelling. So I transitioned more from data science into analytics. And that's where I spent the majority of my career within the industry, within roles such as business intelligence associate and data visualization engineer. And that was the majority of my career. I discovered over the course of that time, however, bringing me to the present day, that communication and presentation are some of the most important skills that an analyst or a data scientist needs to have, but there isn't a lot of training available out there specifically for people within our industry to help them upskill. And I wanted to make it my mission to close that soft skills gap and help professionals with their communication and presentation, and that's what I do today.
Great. So that was a great calling, I must say. And how has your experience as a public speaking and presentation expert influenced your approach in data storytelling?
One of the things that most influenced my approach was thinking about what presentations mean in general. A lot of people believe that a presentation is about giving information to the other person, but I realized from my experience within the music industry that a presentation is really about creating an experience for the audience to inspire them to take some kind of action. So it's not about information necessarily, it's about experience. And an analogy I can give to this is there are all these recordings of music present on YouTube for free. So why would anybody pay to go to a concert? But people do that in droves. They love that experience of going to see their person that they really idolize live performing the music. And the same goes for a presentation. Why couldn't I just email the information to the other person? That has all the information, the same as a presentation itself. But the difference between an email and a presentation is that you are present there to give it with your voice, with your body language, with your delivery, with the personality and unique perspective that you have. So that's what differentiates a presentation from an email, and that's what differentiates a good presentation from a great one, is understanding that it's not about giving information. It's about creating an inspirational experience the audience
Now
can
that
take
you
away.
have, I can tell that you are an expert in this field in terms of public speaking and presentation. But you might have had your own challenges, right? So, what are some of the challenges that you faced when presenting data to executives, or how did you overcome them?
I think that for me, one of the major challenges that I experience within the industry is comes down to actually personality. So it may not be apparent from the way that I carry myself now, but I actually am naturally a more introverted person. And I feel like in a lot of the workplaces, especially in Western countries like the United States, where I have worked for the majority of my career, they encourage a more extroverted disposition, and that's what is successful. So if you don't speak up during meetings in the workplace, that can be sometimes perceived as you not caring about the work. So people expect that if you talk about something, that indicates the level of care that you have for it. But the reality is a lot of fellow colleagues that I've had tend to also be on the more introverted side. So they won't speak up during meetings and they'll keep to themselves. They'll think a lot about what's going on, but they may not voice it. So a lot of the difficulty I experienced early on in my career was gaining the confidence to speak up in the workplace. And I actually got a comment during one of my early meetings, and the person said, you know, this other colleague of yours, he speaks up all the time. He's like a firecracker during the meetings, but during the meetings, you don't say anything. You're as quiet as a mouse, and we don't know what's going on in your head. So what I needed to work on was gaining the confidence to make my ideas heard and gain the respect of my peers by doing that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I can resonate to that because even I'm an introvert myself, so I had to like take my own steps to like being heard and talk through my ideas. So that's definitely a challenge for all the introverts in this field. Can you walk through some of your process on creating a compelling data story?
I usually go with a three-step approach, and this three-step approach creates an arc. And an arc is the key to making the presentation engaging for data storytelling. So it begins with the context. So you talk about what is the surrounding detail around the problem that you're going to talk about. So you talk about things like company history, past trends, and then you reach the middle part of the presentation, which is the climax. This is the big insight, the big takeaway you want people to remember once they leave the room after the presentation. So that's the big climax. So you give the context so they can understand the climax. And then finally, you have the conclusion. And that's the action you need to take to resolve the big insight and problem that you presented. So context, climax, and conclusion. Surrounding detail to understand what's going on, bring everyone on the same page. Big insight that you want them to take away the problem that the organization, say, is experiencing. And then the conclusion, the action to take to resolve that problem.
Wow, that was clear and crisp there, Christopher. So can you give us some of the examples on how a successful data story that you have created, or anybody that you have learned through experience, and what made them effective?
I can give an example when I worked for the Department of Transportation. It's a public project. Some other data stories I might not be able to share publicly, but this one is a public-facing story. I worked on the National Transportation Noise Map for the United States. So it shows a map of the United States where color indicates the degree of noise pollution, essentially, that you experience within cities and across the geography. And the data story that I came up with was that same framework. So context, climax, and conclusion. The context was understanding the trends in the past. How has noise pollution evolved? What are the levels of noise across the United States throughout history? And the climax was I identified that noise is increasing. And this was, I think, several years ago when I worked on this project. So noise has been increasing over time. And this is detrimental because noise pollution affects our health as human beings. It affects our mood. It affects all kinds of things. And it's important to make sure that it doesn't continue to increase, but we can abate it with governmental regulations and things like that. So the conclusion that I've reached was here are certain areas where there's a lot of noise pollution, and perhaps we need to institute more regulation in order to make sure it doesn't continue to increase. I also identified areas where it was decreasing. And I said that's an interesting thing that generally the levels of noise pollution are increasing, but in these few spots, it actually went down, and I explored that, and I said the reason for that may have been because, say, less military takeoffs in the airports around these areas, and also less traffic around these common highways. So perhaps the way to decrease noise pollution for these other areas is to take a similar approach. So that was the basic data story that I came up with for that example.
Great, great. So thanks for sharing your data story. And being in the data industry, we are in a position where you'll have to present to different teams, right? It doesn't have to be a data team where you're going to present. So how do you tailor your data story telling approach to different audiences?
I take an approach that's similar to how I design dashboards as an analyst. So as an analyst, I create a dashboard consisting of all the numbers, say the person reading it needs to know about, all these charts indicating trends over time. And the way that I design a dashboard, the key to that is knowing who your audience is on the other side. So a dashboard is not going to work for everyone. Every single person has a different set of metrics that they're most interested in. So if I'm presenting a dashboard to fellow developers at the same level as me and the team, then they'll need to know very granular detail commonly. As an example, if I'm creating a dashboard on performance of jobs that are transferring data from place to place, I'll need a dashboard that goes at the granular level of each job and its performance. But an executive looking at a dashboard will need a completely different set of metrics. They don't need all that level of detail. They need a 10,000-foot view to understand, say, how the team is performing in general. So then I would have a different set of metrics, a different kind of dashboard for them to see. So tailoring presentations works in the same way. You really need to know who your audience is, what kind of information they need to know, and what actions they need to take in order to design an effective presentation.
Great, great. Yeah, that's true. That's true, Christopher. So, what do you think are the most common mistakes that you see people make while presenting, and how we can avoid in general?
One of the most common mistakes that I see is overuse of technical jargon. So a lot of times for us as technical professionals, we know the field very well. We know all of this terminology and we can talk about it with our peers. But when it comes to talking to non-technical audiences, particularly executives and managers who aren't familiar, that's when things become problematic, because if we use a lot of technical jargon, we'll lose our audience in the process. It may seem like we're increasing our credibility by using fancy terms, but it really decreases our credibility if no one understands what we're saying. So one of the most common mistakes I see in technical presentations is overuse of that jargon and not using just simple, easy to understand business language that everyone in the room can understand.
Yeah, so that comes to my next question. So my next question was, how do you approach communicating complex and technical data to a layman audience? So what if there is a situation where it is a technical presentation, but then you have to speak in a simple terms? What do you suggest people to do on that situation, during that situation?
I typically recommend a 3-circle approach to understanding your audience. And to really understand your audience, you need these 3 things. So 1, you need to understand what's their level of technical proficiency right now in the present. So doing your research on who's going to be in the room with you when you present, what is their level of technical proficiency? What kind of words and terminology do they understand? And are they looking for you saying during the presentation itself? Number 2, looking into the past. So understanding what information they've seen before. If an executive is in the room with you, understand what similar presentations he's seen in the past. Has he seen good sales performance in the past and now you're presenting something bad? He's going to be frustrated and have a lot of questions. So you need to understand how to tailor to that. And 3, thinking about the future. So this comes back to understanding what action the people in the room need to take once the presentation is over. Once you understand all those 3 things, you can tailor the technical language you use to an appropriate level for the audience you're presenting to, and make sure that they understand everything based on the material that you're conveying to them. So knowing your audience is key to presenting, especially if they're not technical.
Great. Thanks for sharing that in a bulleted version, because when you were telling, I was like picturing myself in that way. And can you share any tips for making data more relatable and memorable? Because I've seen in certain presentations when the stakeholders tell that after seeing the whole idea of what you're going to present, they say this quote unquote, it'll be like, it's nice to know. So in certain situations, in those situations, what do you recommend us to make your data story more memorable and relatable for them to start taking actions? What would you suggest?
I would recommend a complete shift in mindset than what we're used to as technical professionals. And what I mean by that is this. For us as technical professionals, we think a lot about how. We think about how to solve problems. We think about solutioning. But what the people we talk to, the stakeholders, the executives, what they want is to know why. So it's a complete shift in mindset from what we're used to thinking about how to the mindset of our audience, which is thinking about why. So why should they care about it in the first place? What's in it for them when they have to listen to your presentation? So what I recommend is not just presenting the facts as they are that we found, but thinking about what is the audience actually looking for in relation to those facts? What can they do about those facts? What kind of problems are those facts relaying, and how can we solve those problems? So thinking from that granular view that we're used to that more 10,000-foot view of a non-technical person, that's the key. Why over how.
Okay. So I am a person who talks a lot about empathy, and so can you discuss how important is the role of empathy in data storytelling, or how it can be used in connecting with an audience?
Empathy is one of the most important skills to have as an analyst, and I think it's very underemphasized in our industry. What often happens when there's a lack of empathy is there's a lot of miscommunication between data teams and the business, and communication breakdowns often lead to failed deliverables, failed initiatives, and a lot of requirements aren't satisfied because people don't understand each other. So what I typically recommend is a 5-step framework for approaching communication between data teams and the business to build that empathy. And in that 5-step framework, the first step is to really listen. And listening is more than just hearing the words that the other person is saying, but actively trying to understand those words. So listening is key to empathy, understanding where the other person is, how it is to stand in their shoes, and what problems they need to solve. The second step of that framework is identifying the problem. So once you've taken the time to listen, then you can talk to them and together be on the same page about what the problem really is. Often the stakeholder will present to you what they think the problem is, but they're relying on you and your technical expertise to guide them to what the problem actually is. And the third step is to identify the solution, to propose the solution. So once you've listened, found the problem, now you can tell them what you think is the best way to solve it. The fourth step is communication, consistent communication. So once you've done all those 3 preceding steps, now it's time to meet with the stakeholder on a consistent basis. So not just gather the requirements at the beginning, run away, create the product, and show up later and expect them to use it, but communicate with them consistently throughout the development lifecycle. So show them updates, show them demos, get their feedback, let them feel a sense of shared ownership in the project so that they can feel like their feedback's being heard. That's the key to empathy as well. Making sure that you understand the person's problems, what they're going through. They might feel very confused seeing this project over time, make things as clear as possible for them. And the 5th step is to deliver the result at the end. And there's a key distinction here between handing off the product and handing away the product. A lot of times what happens in data teams is you hand away the product to the person on the other side and you just expect them to know how to use it, but you need to hand off the product to them. You need to give them enough resources, ongoing support, perhaps tutorials, sessions where they can really get familiar with the tool you build for them so that they can actually use it. So that kind of approach to communication and stakeholder management is the key to a good empathetic relationship with them.
Wow, great. Thanks for sharing the framework, Christopher. I'm sure this will definitely help others to incorporate the role of empathy in storytelling. So, with respect to aspiring data analysts or data scientists who are just starting out in the field, what advice do you give them to improve their data presentation? Because many of them start their journey with honing their technical skills. None of them start with presentation skills. So, what advice would you tell the beginners or the people who are aspiring to be into the field of data?
I would tell them that soft skills, quote unquote, like communication, are just as vital to your role as an analyst as the technical ones. And while you may focus on the technical skills at first, and they're absolutely fundamental to your role, you also need to focus, even at the very beginning, on developing your communication. And an interview is the great place where that comes to play. You need to know the technical skills to get your foot in the door and get the interview in the first place. But you're going to succeed in the interview only if you have good communication skills. And you can demonstrate that you can perhaps talk to stakeholders in a successful way in the future. So the best way I usually recommend for people to improve their communication skills is to record yourself. It's very uncomfortable for a lot of people to do. They don't like seeing themselves on camera and where you can really see the areas of weakness, but that's the best way to figure out areas where you need to improve. So I recommend people that to record themselves, maybe a little recording every day of yourself saying something, some kind of presentation, some kind of short communication. See areas where you could potentially improve. See things that other people would notice, areas where maybe the momentum in your speech slowed down and where you could pick it up. And that's the best way to really target how to improve your presentation communication skills.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you for giving us that information and advice. And so, how do you stay up to date with the developments, Christopher? Because things do change. Data field is constantly evolving. So, as how you have to present your ideas. So, how do you stay relevant and stay up to date on those developments?
I think one of the great things about the communication and presentation side of the industry is that the fundamental principles that underlie it have remained consistent over the entire time that humans have been presenting throughout history. So fundamental aspects about how to create a good narrative arc, how to deliver information in an impactful way, in an engaging way, those things stay constant no matter what technology there is surrounding it. So for example, PowerPoint was not around 1,000 years ago. Humans were still giving presentations and communications. It's just technology has evolved to the extent we can improve those communications and make it more interactive, especially in a virtual setting like this. But the fundamental principles underlying communication remain the same. Same goes for technology and data storytelling. So Tableau and Power BI, say, are popular nowadays as visualization tools. In maybe 10 years' time, there is something new that will come that will dominate the industry. But at the heart of it, data visualization principles remain the same no matter what tool you're using. You need to take a tool agnostic approach in order to be an effective analyst. So know how to create a good graph, maybe on pen and paper. That's the key to really knowing what you're looking for and not being stuck in the perspective that a tool limits you to. So what I do in order to remain relevant within the industry is still to stay up to date with the industry trends, what kind of tools are dominating the market at this time, but staying true to the fundamental principles of both data visualization, data storytelling, and communication.
True. Yeah, true. That was actually true to be with the principles than to be around with tools, because obviously that's going to change. And so as a data professional and as well as an expert in the field of presentation and public speaking, can you talk on what are the new or emerging trends in data storytelling that you are excited about, and would you really like, what are the things that you would like to share to us also?
What I'm most excited about when it comes to data storytelling is not even technological innovation, but just the embrace of it throughout the industry. I feel like this move towards encouraging data storytelling hasn't been around forever. It's been a recent hot topic and buzzword in the industry because people are realizing that it's not just the data analytics that's important, but it's how we communicate that is important. So companies are sitting on all these terabytes and petabytes of data, but if you can't communicate their value to anyone, it's not going to have value whatsoever to the business. So data storytelling is really the key to mining the important information from all the data companies are sitting on and communicating it in a succinct and accessible way for non-technical audiences to understand. So we can understand how to improve business profit, how to improve business sales, how to decrease time, increase efficiency. All these things we can do by understanding data well. And the key to that is really the communication and storytelling aspect that's been embraced by the industry in increasing amounts in recent years. So I'm very happy to see that, and I'm very excited to see
Yeah, that's true. Even I'm excited to see how it goes. And so now I would like to talk about some fun question is that you said you started as an engineer in acoustic field, and then you realized you were interested in data field. But what made you feel that teaching is your passion, and how did you realize that?
I have two stories behind why I realized teaching was my passion. The first was when I upskilled in data science to really transition into the field. I took a bunch of free online courses from Andrew Ng, who's one of these fundamental pillars in data science, who gave a lot of free educational content on deep learning, machine learning, algorithms, data science, statistics. I watched all of his content. And without him, I wouldn't have the interest I do in the field. So I really am indebted to him for taking the time to create that kind of content to inspire people through his teaching. And I realized that what I wanted to do to give back to the community was to do something in a similar way, just with my particular specialty in communication and presentation. And the second story that I have related to that is I first discovered my passion for teaching back in high school, actually. I was an intern for a class where I helped teach chemistry, AP chemistry to students. And I discovered how meaningful that kind of work was. During my time in the data industry, yes, the work was criminally meaningful. I can make an impact on companies, a very large impact on companies. But in that setting, in that very small setting, I could make a real impact on people, on students, see the transformation over time from not knowing a lot about the subject to becoming experts within it. And that positive impact on people is why I discovered my love to teach.
Great story, Christopher. So another question is like, this was something that I wanted to ask in a personal level is like, now we have you teaching us all the importance on how to provide better storytelling and like how you can improve on your public speaking skills in terms of data field. So who was that Christopher in your life? Like, did you have anybody in your life in particular to take that decision or improve yourself in that perspective?
I did have a special mentor figure in my life that helped me in the way that I hope to help people nowadays. And that was actually the same class I was mentioning where I was an intern for AP chemistry. My teacher in that class was the mentor figure in my life that inspired me to take this route. And she actually pulled me aside one day after class. And she said to me, "You're doing brilliant work, but no one's going to recognize that if you don't speak up about it." So this is the same kind of problem that I was telling you about earlier when it comes to the workplace. Because I wasn't speaking up during meetings, no one could respect my ideas. And that rang true even back in high school where my teacher said, "You're doing such a great job in all your reports, all your written assignments, but because you don't speak up in class, no one's going to recognize all the value that you bring." And that really just gave me the kick I needed to understand that it's important to voice my ideas and be confident in what I can bring to the table and not believe that by me saying something, it's taking up someone else's time or someone's going to be critical of it or people are not going to value it. I have to bring value to my own ideas and my own work. And yeah, the rest of my career was really built upon building that confidence in myself because of that initial push from my mentor figure to pursue communication and presentation. And that's why I'm doing what I do today.
Great. That's great to know. I think there will be someone in particular in your life to make that step happen, right? So it's great to know about your story as well, Christopher. So at the final note, I did see that you provide services to several organizations and at an individual level or at an organization level. So could you explain in detail on your services here?
Sure. So what I offer is a combination of both one-on-one coaching. So for data professionals who are interested in working on their communication and presentation skills, if you have an interview coming up, or if you want to rise in the ranks in your organization and you want to make sure that your communication is up to par when you have increasingly public or internal audience-facing roles, that's where I come in to help with one-on-one coaching. I also offer training for data teams. So this is when I work with an organization, I personalize the training to the kind of work that they do to make sure it's maximally engaging for the people that I'm working with. And I help them with a variety of different skills when it comes to communication and presentation within specifically the data space. So I teach how to understand your audience, for example, how to answer questions effectively, what I call the 4 C's of communication, how to communicate concisely, confidently, convincingly. And I feel like I missed them, but it's confidence, conciseness, convincingness, and yeah, there's a 4th one that I'm forgetting, but I can get back to you on that. But those are the 4 C's of communication. And the last part is how to structure an effective presentation. So starting with the introduction, going to the conclusion, how to make sure you have that narrative arc. So all of those elements there are what I bring to the data team trainings to make sure by the end, they feel like they're expert communicators within their field.
Great. That was great to know that you're providing services. And I must say, you have a strategy, you have framework set up already. So it's great to know that like there is a couple of things that you have, or agenda and things that are already in place for you. For all of us like who are interested in getting to know about storytelling and data field. So that is all I have, Christopher. It was great talking to you.
Thanks so much, Nima, for the opportunity to be on your podcast. It was a pleasure getting to meet you and talk about these very important topics. So.